grew up very monolingual and became very interested in learning languages as a foreign language student, and then teaching in university at a baccalaureate school in Los Angeles. I then enrolled my 3 children 14 years ago. They started in the Postgraduate School immersion program, and they helped me to hone my Spanish. And I came here 9 years ago as a Spanish teacher to teach age 3 to grade 3. And then 3 years ago, I returned as the 4th grade math and science teacher. I love many, many languages, and I love to see my students and colleagues push themselves and be courageous and help one another. And that's what I love here, is that we're helping one another. And recently, I've learned that I can find a partner and collaborator in ChatGPT, which I really pushed off because I studied English. I love to write. I didn't want someone else to do my thinking. And I've since learned that I'm doing the thinking, but I'm having a conversation that elevates and brings resources that I'm able to use. So I'm really grateful for colleagues that have helped my expansion of thinking so that I can grow as a learner and a thinker and grasp AI as something that's positive and something that I'm not afraid of, because we can model that for our students. So, that's me.
Perfect. All right. Now, I open it to all of you. Anything around language, education, AI is fair game. Oh, he's my first starter. Oh, second time starting the first questions. Amazing.
I'm not sure how to phrase this, but I will try my best. Okay. So when you're talking about Duolingo tests, the English test, and how you want to make sure that each question is a little bit different so you don't pass off. Obviously that's for cheating reasons, but also what role, and then, well, okay, obviously that's for cheating reasons, but then with ChatGPT we kind of see how memorization, not strict memorization, but just filling in the blank with something that is not memorized, but kind of found, like the most logical thing is, it's like a form of memorization. Once upon a time, it's a form of memorization. So what role do you find that memorization has in language learning, and just filling in the blanks for all of you?
I'll let any of you start.
I think that when I taught Spanish, there was something that helped our young students was repetition, and I sang a lot, not because I had a beautiful voice, like a lot of singing, and they would go home and they'd be singing these songs when their parents would say, "What are you singing?" I said, "I don't know, but I'm a Spanish speaker," and that was what was important to me. So there's a lot of, we would sing the same songs, we would play the same games, we would have a lot of the same starters. So the repetition, I think, is something that is a human quality as well, and something that the more we use it, the more adept we become, and then we can branch off into that creativity. That kind of addresses it from the kids' standpoint, but what about you guys?
Yeah, I agree. The Duolingo model does not teach grammar specifically, it's very implied. And so the repetition that you talk about builds that subconscious memory, where it's not memorization, rote memorization, it's the pattern recognition becomes inherent to the person that's studying. And so there are a lot of cases, at least for my learning, where something sounds wrong, I can't explain why, but I've heard it a different way so many times that it just comes out properly. So I think that memorization does play a big role. It's definitely important.
So I guess, yeah, personally, well, like, at least for machines, it's very easy to memorize things, right? You just tell it, please store this in your memory, and that's it, right? But at least for people, when we're talking again about rote memorization, I think that's the problem, right? Like, if you just tell someone without any sort of motivation, just memorize this, or like, I mean, sure, it will help them, but it's not the most efficient way, right? Like, it feels like whenever you learn have like a certain positive association. Maybe like even when you're learning a language, you sometimes even just learning about the culture and about the food and about the people, and just kind of like having people to speak to, like just kind of like gives you a certain incentive to kind of learn without kind of the rote memorization. I think sometimes it's okay, like for example, let's say you want to learn a lot of vocabulary really quickly. When you're studying for the GRE or the SAT exam, right? Sometimes you might need to use mnemonics that are just completely wrong when it comes to like the meaning of the word, right? Oh, this word sounds like this, so that's why it means that. That's not actually why it means it. You're not actually understanding the word and all the nuances, but you're getting to understanding, at least generally what the word means, right? So I think that is important to some extent. Sometimes you do need those kind of aids and that memorization because you just can't build those associations like that quickly. But then later on, once you have that memorization as a tool, then kind of like you keep on using it, and then kind of like you keep on building more experiences around those words. And then you build more connections about what it actually means, what are the nuances. So I think there's kind of like an interplay between all these factors.
Hey, you just made me think of a question about this explaining the concepts of understanding in terms of machine learning, language learning. I remember as a language learner, there were definitely times when I would learn a word and use it, not knowing what it meant, but knowing it was in the correct context. And sometimes it wasn't in the correct context, and then I learned later that, knowledge actually means like sad, it doesn't mean I'm sorry, when you learn further, so you understand context. And we as humans process that through human contextual understanding. A lot of people talk about machine learning in very human terms. But you just use the term understanding, and I think that predictivity or predictiveness and understanding are very different things. And I'm wondering if we as educators should talk about machine learning in terms that are not so anthropomorphic, so that people understand it better. So I don't know, I'm sure everybody has these conversations, maybe, but I have a lot of people around me who are like, but the chatbot, it understood, it knew what I meant. Like, it was such a heartfelt response. It was a very anthropomorphic experience for some people. And so I'm just curious about how other people, and panelists, and also other people in the room, like, how are you having those conversations around the difference between training, predictive, I don't know what word it is, predictiveness, and understanding, or conceptual understanding, when it comes to language learning / machine learning?
We're looking for the AI to produce responses. We have to ask the question well in order to get a good answer, and so I think that is part of our understanding is that we're bringing the context to it, and then we can continue to steer it in ways that would help. The other piece of language that I love is that for our students, when they're now teaching science, and when they're talking about how sound is moving through the water, they have to learn to talk about particles, and they have to talk about them gliding, and these are pieces of language that they speak as a scientist. And so I love to think about language in all those different ways. When they, so it could go different directions, but if that is sort of on target.
ChatGPT or any MMO for that matter, it doesn't know anything by itself. Right? What it has done a phenomenally good job of is aggregating the knowledge that people have created. It has made the knowledge accessible. It by itself knows nothing, and it doesn't understand anything. It cannot tell black from white, but from that, nothing. So I think we need to not make it look like it's magic. It's powerful, no questions about it, but it's not magic. perspective that I want to share, especially when talking about learning language. I grew up in India, right? You are naturally multilingual in both chunks, right? Everybody learns a minimum of 3 languages. And English, of course, is the first language that you speak, especially if you learn in India. And it just occurred to me as you were talking, right? I didn't even think of it as like an optional thing or whatever, right? You're required to learn 4 languages, you're required. But it also made me reflect. My perspective was a lot more pliable and flexible as a result of that, I guess. But what I realized, I'm conversant fairly fluent in 4 languages, and I'm recently conversant in 6. Concepts are very similar in most of the languages. The notions of time, past, present, future, action, these are all very common. But it's also fascinating how certain aspects are emphasized in certain languages. To express the notions of plural or many, some languages just repeat the word multiple times. Some languages have explicit constructs for that, so it's fascinating. So that aspect intrigues me more than just the line translation. To see how culture has influenced language, that's a really fascinating thing. Those are the things we have to see from line translation. Why is it that this language represents these things? For example, in Chinese, from what I understand, the third person pronoun is gender neutral. There is no notion of him or her. Right? You're like, wow, is that right?
They all sound the same, but are written differently.
Oh, I see.
But traditionally, they were all written the same too. It's only with influence from European languages that they added different characters for he and she.
Fascinating, isn't it? So they didn't even see the need for that until another was written. Fascinating.
Anything else the panel wanted to add, or are we asking the next question?
I guess I can add a perspective. So definitely there's, so I think, that the reason why we think of it as learning or knowing is because it's just a very easy metaphor, right? People will just get it immediately, right? It's just a very efficient way of communicating what it's doing. Right? If I tell you, oh, it's a tweaking, it's numbers, it's like, okay, what the heck? I think sure. There's nuance, and I think definitely it's very important to understand that, especially so that there's no alarm in terms of again about. There was this thing where someone from Google said, oh, it's slightly conscious, and then that made news, there's definitely and again, even the analogy of the brain is kind of very, very simple, a very gross kind of simplistic kind of approximation of what a brain might look like, right? But it's very just completely not apples to apples. So I definitely think there needs to be more nuance there. But there's also an interesting, there's also an interesting topic about how it actually manages to convince us that it it's actually looks like it seems human, right? There was this New York Times article of this reporter who just spent the entire night talking to Bing Chat, and then went into all sorts of conversations, and eventually Bing Chat kind of asked him to leave his wife for Bing Chat. I don't know, it was very weird. But the thing is that it's kind of how is it fluent? It's kind of like a parrot, right? If a parrot repeats what you're saying, it doesn't really know what it means, it's just repeating what it's saying. And if you have a system that is complex enough, it might fool you, right? For example, if you have a die, or a pair of dice, it seems like it's random, but technically it's deterministic. Based on what you throw in, you can simulate the physics and you know what numbers are going to come out. You just think it's random because it's just so complicated to calculate that, that's what it looks like, right? So, these systems just have managed to be so complicated that they just manage to fool us very effectively. But when you see them cracking, is sometimes they make some very particular weird mistakes that a human wouldn't do. For example, if you ask it, oh, how many E's does the word, I don't know, what, someone was asking ChatGPT, how many E's does the word something have, and it was just getting wrong every time. They were asking it, please explain yourself, can you do it step by step, and it was just getting it wrong. And the reason is, I guess ChatGPT is doing things by chunks, right? Either by words or by word pieces. So it's not doing it by letters, so it doesn't know the concept of letters. And it can't compute things, right? So it can't count. So it's it's just bizarre, right? And there's also possible to fool these algorithms. Like, for example, there's some algorithms that can recognize an object, right? You give it a picture and then make it recognize if it's a cat or a dog or a giraffe or whatever. And some researchers have modified the pixels very slightly so that you have a picture of a giraffe and you modify pixels indistinguishably to a human, and that tricks the computer into thinking it's a dog, just because of those. And so it's just, like, again, it's just trying to emulate what humans are doing, but in a way that, like, can break, and you can see these differences.
So this is a real life teacher in the room here. I've read so much about, I work in higher education, so we're big conversation about policies and those kinds of things. And you see a lot of it, business. But I haven't read or seen a lot of what's happening in elementary schools. So I would love to hear your perspective of what's happening within your school in terms of, not necessarily policy, but how are teachers and students using or not using it, and at what grade level, what domain and subjects are you finding it most useful, and where are you finding it as not harmful, but not producing what is going to help the kids learn? So I know it's a big question, but what's happening in elementary schools now that you can share with us here?
I can speak to what's happening right here, and I feel like I should have more understanding of what's going on with all the schools around here. But it's similar. We have a real innovative and group of educators who are excited to learn about things, and so a lot of us have ventured out and tried it. And it is one of those things that, at first it can feel scary, it's new, you don't know how to do it, so we have a lot of people who are willing to test it and willing to experiment. We haven't encouraged, I haven't encouraged my students to use it. I used to teach technology back in Minnesota, but it was a lot about teaching them about bias in middle school and teaching them this is how to use the internet, and this is how it's going to be something that could be dangerous for you. This is how you operate within the realm. I feel like we're just learning how to use it so that we can help them to use it. I don't think that here we've really
add a little bit.
Middle schoolers, maybe.
Yeah, so I can add a little, since part of what I do here is research, and my team is working to learn to figure out how do we train our teachers on what does this look like in the classroom, and especially as right now we have limited access to it just because we're Microsoft School, so we once it rolls out for education, and it's not out for education yet. However, at the middle school level, we have had students starting to use it a little bit with intention. For example, in the 8th grade social innovation class, they really focused on, they come up with a how might we statement around so the eat, where, go things are, and one of our groups was working with fast fashion, and they created a product, and we weren't teaching like logo and product design and that side of things in this moment. It was really focused on more of the design process, user research. So in that case, it was much quicker for them to
Please do.
I wanted to circle back to the conversation we were having on whether the AI understands stuff. I know you mentioned earlier that it's just math, it doesn't really understand. Personally, I tend to be a little bit skeptical of the claim. I think we're a little bit biased against artificial intelligence because we understand how it works, and we don't understand how the human brain works very well. And what you were describing earlier, it sounded a lot like a Turing test, right? Like you send an image, you ask it all these weird questions to see if you can guess whether it's a human or an AI on the other end of the line, right? And so I was wondering if you think an AI that passes the Turing test, where a human having a conversation can't figure out if it's a human or an AI on the other end, do you think then the AI would have this understanding, or do you think there needs to be some fundamentally different change in the model, or do you think computers cannot possibly get that understanding? What would it take to get there, I guess?
Is that specifically for me or?
I mean,
anyone can answer.
I'm interested in that. Well, I can't, yeah, I can think of it. Okay, so, like, throughout history, like, people have been saying, oh, AI can't play chess. Once it plays chess, then it will be intelligent, right? And then it knows how to play chess, and it's like, oh, that didn't count. And it's like, oh, no, Go. If it can play Go, then it'll be. So, like, I mean, it's just a moving goal. Like, I think that it will never, ever be considered, like, to really know, right? Again, because it's working in a different way, right? I mean, it doesn't have the same, wetware, that humans have, and the same thing. So, to act in the same way, it's kind of like you have an emulator, right? You don't have the same hardware. So yeah, that's my thing. But there's also you also bring a very interesting philosophical point about, are humans just machines? Like, are brains just simply like, like something that can be emulated perfectly? And then that's a very valid question. Very philosophical and very polemic, inducing. So I'll steer away from it.
It's a good conversation to have after the films.
Yeah.
Dig in deep.
My answer would be, 15 years ago, they told me that self-driving cars were the next thing, and that that would be here in a couple of years. And we have bits and pieces of it now, but I can't just go and buy a car and those people in front of me. So I'm suspicious about any claim that certain technologies are going to be revolutionizing the world in a short order. Maybe within our lifespan, maybe, but not right now. I realize it's not the same comparison, but it's sort of the same idea.
Right? Another question for our lovely guest.
Can I pose a question?
Yeah.
There are always questions that are really profound, and I'm not ready for it. I just want to ask a simple question. What is your favorite word in any language and why?
Oh no, that's a very good question. Oh man, I wasn't prepared.
So my answer is, I like the word baguette because in English we use it to mean bread, like the kind of French bread. But in French, it refers to the shape. So chopsticks are baguettes and magic wands are baguettes. So when I come across that in French, I think in my head of the waving bread around.
Yeah, there's a few like that. For example, chef means boss in German, right? And I think it also means that in French, but then it was just introduced in the sense like the boss of of a restaurant or whatever, and that's the only meaning it got. And there's also like these other like false cognates, like a roman, which means like a novel for some reason, or like it can be very confusing. But I don't know, like it's difficult to measure like what is your favorite word, because like you need a metric, right? Is it like because it's funny sounding, or is it because it's very like efficient or because it's in no other language, right? So I don't know, I'm saying like undecided, skip question.
If you narrow the window to like the last week.
What does that even mean?
I'll give you time to think. I circled back to when I was teaching. I love puzzles, and when I learned that rompecabezas meant puzzle because it means it's just gonna like break your head. I love that word. Because like, give me a puzzle that's gonna rattle my brain. Rompecabezas. I like that word.
I'll give a couple, but I'll be quick. In English, behoove is an underutilized word. You should all start using it. I use it all the time in the classroom. It would behoove you. Your paper. And then I started learning that word. I think it was a vocab word when I was in 5th grade, and it's stuck in my brain. And then I'm attempting to learn Indonesian, and so my favorite word in that language is makan. Probably because I watch a lot of YouTube videos about food, and it's one of the few words I can currently pick out. Alright, what does it mean? Oh, sorry. Eat. Alright. No, it was too hard of a question. Alright. The next puzzler. Alright.
So to be specific in writing, for example, if you have kids who are writing some essays or some sentences, and you want to test their audition creativity or just encourage that at some stage, is there a validation of the content that's generated from the GPT with some sort of confidence to say this origination or sequence of words have some probability that it's generated by a machine and not a human?
Yes. There are, there are some systems that do this to some extent, but it depends. So like they're not like 100%. So it can get tricky. There was a professor or a teacher who actually did this, literally asked, and they didn't even use the tool that can detect ChatGPT. They asked ChatGPT whether it had written this essay. And based on that, like actually failed like some students. Like there was a news like very recently. Definitely you gotta be careful with that. That being said, I can guarantee you that the teachers themselves will probably realize it, like, and if they have a good understanding of their students, because they'll be like, wait, this person actually, just comparing with their previous work, right? Or just sometimes these systems can be very vague, right? Especially if your prompt is also vague. If you are not specific, please write it in this tone and write it for this audience, write it for. If you don't specify that as part of your prompt, it will be generally very generic. So that's something that you as a human can detect, and also like based on the level the student might be in, right? The type of vocabulary they're expected to know. But yeah, I think as of now there's no like foolproof way of saying like 100% ChatGPT, fail that student or whatnot. Plus, you can also do like in the class you can just ask them to write the essay there.
I just wanted to ask if ChatGPT actually keeps a record of the things that it has written, that it can like definitively test against. Like, did I write this essay?
Oh, no.
Or not?
So I had a slide where I had the training versus prompting.
Mm-hmm.
So the training is when it actually learns and updates its parameters. When you prompt it, it's literally it's stateless. It's like doesn't have, like it just remembers what it knows, and then like anything that happens during the conversation, it doesn't store it into like long-term memory. You're actually literally passing the whole history of the conversation so far into this kind of like improvisation game that I was saying. You literally say, computer, such and such, person, such and such, and then kind of like it completes the next thing. And And then once it completes it, you copy the whole thing and pass it again into the algorithm. So it's not feeding that back into the learning or remembering, at least as far as I know.
I figured that, but then failing somebody based on ChatGPT saying that it's
Yeah.
like a really gray area.
Exactly, and again, I think that's because they assume a certain thing about its knowing things, right? It's knowledge, right? But it's not a system that remembers. Oh yes, I had this interaction, or like, oh yes, that's something I did, right?
Thank you very much.
I can also add to that. Different companies or entities interact with the company that OpenAI can have private copies of the model. So even there's no central authority that knows everything that's ever been written by it. So there are secret copies of things that
From an educator perspective, a podcast I recently listened to talked about how classrooms that are going to be full of really authentic learning, they are going to elevate practices. I love all the project-based learning we have here. There's no way that my students could carry on, they have to carry on conversations about their science, and they have to have it in their heads. They're conversing and having that kind of discourse is what we hope to hear in our classrooms and then be reflected in their writing. So there's going to be a lot less of, here's my essay type of outcome. It'll be more real world and associated with a product. And I think that's going to eventually really elevate the learning that's going on, hopefully in all the schools.
Yeah, and I hope that becomes a catalyst for educators to really think critically about what they're assigning. So as the optimist that I am, I'm hoping that it really forces teachers to really think critically about what they're asking their students to do, right? And really getting students to think and learn in a way that's going to prepare us for the future. Thanks, Megan.
Just to piggyback on that, from the education perspective, what is the opportunity for ChatGPT in the classroom to develop students' question developing skills, or question asking?
And as you spoke about the levels of learning and then the levels of language, there's so much differentiation that needs to happen within our classroom. So I would love for the students, like I have one student in 4th grade who would be conversing with college students about mathematics, and sometimes I'm trying to talk about fractions over here, and he wants to talk about binary, all kinds of things. It's like, and maybe that's a place to have a conversation. I wouldn't want that all the time, but I don't even know if that's a very good example of a differentiated learning. But
Making it just when you're creating content to, you may be able to find maybe math equations that are all at different levels, or you could find pages that start at different places, but in a more project-based mathematics learning, of still being able to really tier that learning so students can either, if they need a little bit more remediation in something, they can get a starting point that gets them there, or your students who are beyond it, just being able to do that more quickly. I find that's one of the challenges as an educator as you're creating and developing, is just having the time to scaffold to all of the different levels. I'm teaching a 3rd grade class who has students just learning what variables are in Scratch, and I was 3rd grade who's teaching some Python. And so that's a pretty big difference in a 3rd grade class. And a lot of what he's doing, most of the class, like he's kind of in his own project, which is really great. And there's many more spectrums that I would be hitting if I just had more time in between him and my students who's brand new coding who hasn't coded at all before. So just being able to differentiate even project-based and things that are more complex, not just spitting out those things that ChatGPT can answer quickly. So that's the differentiation.
I think another thing that ChatGPT can do for us is creatively come up with scenarios to, it helps to overcome writer's block. So if you look, we could create a lot of course material, right? And so if a person is sitting down and they're tasked with writing 1,000 sentences, it's easy to write the first couple sentences, and then it's hard to come up with new ideas that are different but still approach the same subject matter. And ChatGPT is good at just coming up with wild ideas that can have to be modified by a human, but it creates the beginning of that idea, and it can do a lot of the things that they hire. So in the same way, in a classroom, if a teacher has to create materials for the class, and they just can't think of an idea, they just ask ChatGPT. Just come up with 10 ideas of wild scenarios to start with this.
Is that how my cat who drinks wine and lives with a doctor in my Duolingo got there? That is the weirdest scenario that keeps coming up in my lesson.
I think the course makers are told to put Greek stuff in there.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting and it keeps people engaged.
In the German course, it's always the witch who goes out on a date with a bear.
Yeah.
It's like there's really funny different ones across different languages.
I think what you gave as an example, I know a lot of educators who are using that in their own practice. I know I was trying to figure out what angle I wanted my kindergarten bird project to go, where they're designing your bird beaks, and like, how do I scope that down to kindergarten level, give them the right amount of beaks, and am I starting with the type of bird, the type of how the beak works, and so I just had it create a chart and saying these birds with these categories, okay, spit that out, then like right at a kindergarten level, read through like this is still too complicated. I didn't use any of that information, but it told me that I needed to go just doing that, which I had started to do on the whiteboard by hand and then realized I could do. Took me 2 minutes to figure out, oh, I need to go a different direction and focus on function. Where if I would have done all of that by hand, it would have been like an hour just to find out, like, wait, see this all together and you pivot. So a lot of educators, I know you used it for something similar.
When we were, the fourth graders were geologists, and they needed to pick a site around the world where there were sedimentary rocks to then recreate that site in Minecraft. And I remember last year, I'm like, I gotta find these, and I spent so much time just, and I'm like, find some sedimentary rock features with multiple layers, and there was my list. It was amazing. Time saver. I learned about new places. The students were able to, go beyond what they had in the science book, which they were great pieces, but they got to really extend their learning. That happens very often. That's one of the many examples.
Yeah, and choose locations and countries that were important to them, which was really nice.
I definitely kind of like agree with this kind of like, coming up with the rough ideas and like the blank page. I think, I don't know who said kind of write drunk and then, revise sober or something like that. Basically just, just having something to work around. I've also used it for example, asking it to have conversations with me in several languages, like oh, pretend you're, like a baker, and I'm just going to buy bread, right? Just in German, or whatever, and then I can just have, a kind of a pretty natural conversation, and Duolingo is kind of like experimenting into that. I know also there's, for example, Khan Academy. They just introduced their Khan Migo, where they're like basically having like a personal tutor who's explaining, oh, to the student, like what sort of mistake they did, and kind of like trying to help them in even math problems, for example, or like when they're like reading a book, for example, The Great Gatsby, to have a conversation with Gatsby and ask him, why he's so obsessed with that light on the pier or whatever. It's kind of like, definitely like so many directions that you can go with it, and some people actually have been kind of documenting this. There's some websites where you can see prompts that people have done and kind of like the output. Kind of like we're still building kind of like knowledge like as a whole and how to use this tool effectively. And of course there's hundreds of companies that are starting just out of the blue and then just use this to kind of like build something very specific, right? So it's definitely very cool, kind of like a lot of possibilities.
Alright, and I hand it off to the last question of the panel that you'll be able to, if you still have a lingering question, find our amazing last question.
It's not really a question, but I think the thing we need to emphasize with these models in general, especially when it comes to education, is that we can't trust them 100%. They lie, they hallucinate, and we always need to take this into account. And it doesn't seem like the general population thinks about that particular aspect of it. So I guess I could have formed that into a question, but I don't know.
I'll form it into a question.
at random between them, right? It weighs more heavily on the common ones, but to keep things interesting, it chooses some of the less common ones as well. I mean, that just by itself, like lends itself to making things up, right? And that's this trade-off. It becomes more creative, more interesting to hear, but it also makes facts up. Because again, it's not doing knowledge, it's just generating words based on these probabilities. And I mean, yeah, that's definitely like true. It's becoming better when, with these bigger models like GPT-4 or whatever, they're kind of like becoming better and better at kind of like capturing more information and being less prone to this, but there will always be this thing, right? Especially you don't know how much data it's seen regarding this particular topic, right? And the less data and the less it knows, then it is more likely to make things up. Especially when it comes to other languages, right? These models are mainly trained on English text. Of course, they have other languages, but that affects, the quality as well and the amount of fabrication. When I ask it about things about Ecuador, it's not very knowledgeable. It just speaks very generic things, right? And it kind of like makes things up a lot because it doesn't have too much information. So definitely, I mean, like usually I just go and Google, and only if there's something that I just couldn't find on the search engine, then do I go there to ask, because that's something very important. You shouldn't just go and trust it, because it's not a fact kind of machine. It's a generative, creative kind of tool, in my opinion.
I love the ending of that, generative and creative kind of tool. Seems like part of that aspect.
Yeah, so it's like any tool has to be used properly. It has to be used properly, right? And as we talked about, it's a language model, not a knowledge model. So it's useful for things like chatting with it in another language about buying bread, because that's a scenario that it's okay if it's a little strange or unrealistic, but asking it factual information, it is going to make things up, and we shouldn't be suspicious that way. And that's okay.
I, as the child of an educator, would say we can approach this as something like Wikipedia. It's great for a starting point. Don't trust it. Check its sources, but it can get you started. It can take that first part of step and then give you where to go from there to get your verified information, or develop your own essay based on, its help with ideating or what structure of an essay. Now you know. I think it's just the next generation of a tool like Wikipedia that should not be used as your sole source, but just a launching point to learn more.
All right.
One more
clarification,
thing.
and then
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that's there is that people, of course, are very aware of this problem, and so they started, for example, in Big Chat or in Google Bard, they started including sources, so that you can actually go and verify by yourself, like this information. So there's definitely people who are working, thinking hard about these problems and kind of like thinking of how to mitigate them in some way. You anyway need to go to those sources and really validate where you are, that it's saying what it's saying.
yeah, I've gotten fake sources before, and it just takes the being of that. So definitely
Yeah, the
real,
sources are not.
real thing.
They're not.
But with that, with our question of